Hey there, everyone. Mychal Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology with a show that we used to do back in the day when I was a one-man team. And I'm no longer a one-man team, so I'm happy to do it all over again and bring you Mychal Fix My Stars. When I was a kid growing up, I was in love with watching Miss Cleo on TV. I think there was a part of me that knew that she was kind of like a scammer, but there was also a part of me that was very invested in her material. And I just loved the thought of having a hotline of some form or another. Now, as all of you know, there's no part of me that's psychic, not even my big toe. So this isn't a psychic hotline, but it is an astrology hotline. And this is where I do essentially what I think Miss Cleo did. And I saw a reel on Instagram going around with Sylvia Brown recently. And this is what I think I love the most, basically, helping people troubleshoot their problems from the perspective of astrology. So I'm super excited to dive into this content and to this material today. I know that we have some people lined up in the studio and we're going to bring them on individually. And basically, I'm going to take a look at their charts and hear their questions and give them answers based on my own astrological practice. If this is your first time joining us here on the Oraculos Podcast, this is your touchstone of concrete, event based astrology here on the internet. And for me, there's nothing more concrete or event based than answering people's questions. And to that note of answering people's questions, somebody asked me before if this was meant to be a horror segment. It's not a horror segment, it is answering questions that arise from within the context of the natal chart, because anything that we're navigating in life is something that is held within our natal promise. So we're going to be taking a look at their natal charts, their soul return charts, if that comes up, and all sorts of other stuff so that we can help these people find questions to the not find questions. I mean, maybe they'll find questions, but so that we can help people find answers to the questions that matter to them the most at this moment. Now, if this is your first time joining us here, and if you're going to stick around for the entire show, or if you can't even stick around for the entire show, please do make sure to go down below and like this video, give this video a thumbs up, because that lets the internet know that the work that we're doing here is something that is attractive and it's something that people are getting value from. Also, for those of you who are specifically listening to this show over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, thank you so much for being a part of our Oraculos family over on those platforms. It means the world to me to have you there. And if you don't currently follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please make sure to subscribe to us over on those platforms as well, so that you can listen to Oraculos Astrology on the go. And also leave us a comment over there. Let people know what you like about the Oraculos podcast so that more and more people can plug in to this material that we're doing here over at OSA. Now, before we dive in, I do want to let you know about one of the biggest things happening this summer, which is going to be Master Astrologer Judith Hill speaking here at the Oraculos School of Astrology on the 6th of July on the topic of remediating Uranus. If you want to plug into this workshop, please do. Judith is an extraordinary astrologer. I just did an interview with Judith on Saturday, and that's currently on our YouTube channel. You can go over and watch that interview and listen to that interview. It is an amazing hour and a half, I think, between Judith and I just so appreciate what she represents within the world of astrology in general. So you definitely don't want to miss this upcoming talk about the transits of Uranus, essentially, and how to remediate Uranus. As far as Western astrology is concerned, we really don't have people bringing in this knowledge and this understanding of how to remediate things that occur to us astrologically in the same way that Judith does. Remediation is a huge topic within Jyotish or Indian astrology, and that's something that we tend to hear about more so within the context of Indian astrology than anybody else's. And Judith has done the lion's share in terms of not only studying astrology, but also studying how to fix some of the issues that we find ourselves navigating from an astrological perspective. And she is a master at fixing the issues that we find ourselves navigating as far as Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are concerned. So if you want to plug into this material because you're a practicing astrologer and you want to elevate your practice to a whole new level and help your own clients with the issues that they face within their astrological chart, or if you're just an astrology lover and you probably have a Uranus transit coming up and you want to know how to navigate that yourself, then by all means join us for this talk with Judith on the 6th of July, in which she's going to be telling us all about how to remediate any transit of Uranus to our natal chart at all. So that includes all of the natal planets, that includes our nodes. She's going to be talking a bit about Uranus through the houses, and she's going to give us over 30 remedial tools so that we can prepare for the rainstorms of Uranus when they pass through our lives. You can find out more information about this workshop by checking out our website at www.oraculosastrology.com/upcoming dash events that no I'm saying this wrong /upcoming dash talks dash events. Joe, we need to simplify that because that's a whole lot. Anyway, so that is the talk with Judith that we have coming up. And secondly, we have our annual Horary Astrology Intensive coming up. That's going to be August 11th. We're going to dive into our first week-long intensive format. Usually, I would let an intensive be every weekend, but somebody said recently in our astrocartography intensive that he really enjoyed this idea of getting it all done as soon as possible. So we're going to be having a week-long intensive as opposed to having a 4-weekend intensive, and we're going to cover everything that you need in order to begin practicing horary astrology within your own life, but also in order to take your horary practice beyond the basics. The name of this book, Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, was at one point in time going to be Horary Astrology Beyond the Basics. And I felt as if that name was basic, and so I named it Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise because I'm long-winded, and also because there's a certain romanticism in that name that I enjoy. And a dear friend and student of mine from the past at Oraculos, Shane Powers, said, Mychal, stick with Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise. And so that's why the book has that name today. Thank you very much, Shane. Shout out to Shane from Annan Valley Astrology, who writes amazing horoscopes. You should definitely go and check out his content over at Annan Valley Astrology. But the point is, we have a textbook for this course, and that has really been my number one desire in life in general, to just write the books for the courses that I teach. And the students at Oraculos appreciate being able to have textbooks that reflect what they're learning within the classroom. But I am so happy to have a textbook for this upcoming Horary Intensive. So if you have already bought my book, Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, and you want to dive deeper into the content in that book, as well as find out some of the cutting edge things that I've been doing within my own horary practice, then by all means join us for our upcoming Horary Astrology Intensive, which begins this August 11th, 2024. Speaking of announcements, I am also back in business. Once again, I thought that when I laid down my mantle of a client practice, I wasn't going to pick it up for a very long time. But I am back in business, and I'm currently giving readings over at Oraculos Astrology. So if you want to dive into any of the readings or any of the services that I offer, then please do go and check out our website. And there's a whole lot, and you can see them on the screen. We have relocational astrology, we have synastry, electional astrology, vocational astrology, natal astrology, medical astrology, anything that you can desire from an astrological perspective, with the exception of me predicting the winning lotto numbers. But everything else, you can find it over on Oraculos Astrology. And I'm really happy to be working with clients again, because I think that that's a really special part of my practice that I didn't know I missed until I started seeing clients again. So if you want to work with me, please go and book yourself a reading with me over on my website. At the moment, I'm only available through this month of June, but we are going to be opening up some July slots with discretion, because I have also been enjoying my free time. And if you want a reading, but you can't book a reading with me specifically, then the students at Oraculos are currently giving readings, and they are pretty awesome. We have a group of certified OSA students who are giving readings over on our website. So if you want to know what the product of an Oraculos education is, then by all means, please go and book yourself a reading with one of our Oraculos certified astrologers today. I think that's pretty much all I have to say as far as things are concerned. And now we're going to dive into today's episode of Mychal Fix My Stars, where I help people navigate the issues that they're facing within their lives from the perspective of natal astrology. Do enjoy. All right. So I am going to share my screen. Let me just set this up. And then, Joe, can you just let me know who do we have up first?
Yeah, so first up we have Al Cav.
Okay.
Do you want me to read the information?
Yes, please. You can go ahead and do that, and then I'll share my screen after.
All right, so it's December 10th, 1979.
Okay, let me just do Al Cav, December 10th, 1979. Yeah.
At 10:15 p.m., Springfield, Massachusetts.
Springfield, Massachusetts. I feel like that's yeah, awesome. And event type?
Event type is male.
Awesome. Great. All right. So let me just share my screen so that we have this chart up for everybody to see. Let's come over here, share screen and window. Great. All right, so we have the chart up on the screen, and Joe, can you just unmute unmute Al just so that we could
Yeah,
get
of
it
course.
directly from him?
Al
Perfection.
is here with us.
Okay, awesome. And Joe, just in terms of keeping things anonymous, if we could, Al, so we're gonna remove your camera just so that you're not on the screen, but your voice is gonna still be on the screen. Okay, good stuff. All
Okay,
right.
Al, you just have to remove your camera by yourself. There should be a button at the bottom. There you go.
Okay, perfect. So, Al, thank you so much for calling in. And how can I help you today? So you have to unmute your
What,
microphone.
that's on mute. If I can be heard now.
Yeah. We can hear you now.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the time and this opportunity and offer. I mean, at the end of the day, I just want your expertise, your wisdom, your knowledge, whatever you see. I posed a question to Joe and an email exchange that we had. Just basically whatever you see for my well-being, whether it's financial purpose, identity, relationships, creativity. I just want your expertise, Michael. Whatever you see would be great to do. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, so Joe, we were having a little bit of challenges with the audio from Al. Is that something we can correct on our end, or is that something?
That is not, but I do have his question written out as well. Would you
Okay.
like me to read it?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So Al asks, I'd love to ask Michael about whether he sees how I thrive in purpose, money, relationships, creativity, and just identity and well-being.
Okay. Awesome. So we have 20 minutes. I'm going to dive into as much as we can do within that space of time. All right. So here we have Al's chart up on the screen. And for those of you who are listening in, the chart information is December 10th, 1979, 10:15 p.m., Springfield, Massachusetts. And the ascendant is 3 degrees Virgo, correct? Either Joe or Al, one
Yes,
of the
that's
two of you.
correct.
Perfection. Okay, so this is a pretty broad question, and in general, from a natal astrology perspective, the houses that I tend to focus on are the first house, the second house, the fourth house, the seventh house, and the 10th house. And so, since we are talking about just life in general, we'll take a look at the chart and see what we see. So, we note that Al is having the first thing that I saw is that 27 degrees of Taurus is on Al's midheaven. And I know that that is relatively close to the fixed star Al goal, which is something that for me is pretty considerable in life in general. But before we dive into that, we're going to dive into the ruler of his ascendant, because that's just how we navigate astrology in general from a traditional perspective. We look at the rule of the first house. So here we have Mercury at 28 degrees of Scorpio present within the fourth house. And one of the first things that we'd say is that Al is navigating life in more of a mercurial way. There's something about him that is curious and excited and that wants to learn everything that he can and devour information, because that's central to Mercury and that's central to how Mercury is navigating and showing up within life in general. So, from that perspective, we might already say to Al that the pursuit of constant study or the pursuit of constant learning could be something that he does well and that he thrives well in, whether that is within a purely educational sense, or whether that is him just reading books, or whether that's him going back to school or whatever. There's this desire to accumulate knowledge and to not only accumulate that knowledge, but also share that knowledge with others around him. These are some of the things that we find with Mercury in general. Now, one of the challenges with being mercurial is that Mercury is the god of travel, and sometimes there can be a part of us that is finding ourselves spread very thin when we have a very big mercurial emphasis within our lives, because we feel as if we're being pulled in multiple directions, because that is just the nature of our interests. We find that Al is having his Mercury in a conjunction with Uranus. Now, Mercury Uranus is one of the combinations that we love to see within the charts of astrologers, because there is something naturally chaotic about astrology. And I think that in general, there's just something naturally chaotic about holding this sort of contradictions that exist within any astrological chart and being able to juxtapose them against each other to skillfully describe the story of this person's life. And so he has the ability to do the mental gymnastics necessary for him to practice something like astrology well. But the Mercury Uranus combination isn't just something that we find in the charts of astrologers, it's also something that we find within the charts of mathematicians, of people who are working in infotech or info science, of people who are just working in technology in general, because there's something electric about how the mind is working when we see Mercury and Uranus operating together. And as a result of that, it gives us the ability to handle areas of life that require us to have revolutionary thoughts, revolution coming from Uranus, thoughts coming from Mercury. And it also allows us to navigate parts of life that require us to be able to think on the spot. Basically, it's a very wonderful troubleshooting combination, because Mercury and Uranus in combination oftentimes represents a person who is able to find the problem, or who's able to identify what's missing in a thing in general, whereas other people might take longer to do that. There is a sharpness, a quickness, a speed to how this person's mind is working. Now, once again, Mercury Uranus oftentimes tends to emphasize the things that are challenging about Mercury. So Mercury Uranus is a combination that causes us to spread ourselves thin. It is a combination that causes our mind to run 1,000 miles an hour. It is a combination that we associate with restlessness. Sometimes Mercury and Uranus can also manifest as even a bit of an anxiety as well, because there's this urge and there's this itch and there's this electric part of ourselves that we just really don't know how to bring into a state of rest and ease. So very often from a medical astrology perspective, we would say to the person who is having a Mercury Uranus conjunction to give themselves more opportunities and more spaces in life to find tranquility and to find peace and to find stability and to turn off that part of themselves that tends to be restless by doing things that can cultivate a spirit of greater ease and steadiness within their lives. Now, Al is also having the Uranus in the conjunction with his fourth house cusp. And as we all know, the fourth house has to do with our family, and it has to do with the story of our family. And the fourth house is being made even that much more significant within his chart because the ruler of his ascendant, Mercury, is present here within the fourth house as well. And so that's an indication for us that the home life, the family story, all of these things are going to be of huge significance and of huge importance within his life in general. Now, from an astrological perspective, whenever we say something like that this thing is going to be of huge importance to you, we always have to ask ourselves why. And the ability to ask ourselves why astrologically is the cornerstone of good, concrete astrology. Because it's not enough to say to somebody that your home life is important to you. Invariably, everybody's home life is important to them. So when we see this sort of thing coming up, we have to then follow that up by asking why. Why is there so much of your personal time and energy and attention centralized within this part of your life? And then that begins to give us more information that actually allows us to get to the core of what the chart is saying. So within this chart, we have Uranus conjunct the fourth house cusp. It's a bit, no, it's not wide at all. It's literally conjunct the fourth house cusp, and it's also in the fourth house by the 5-degree rule. Uranus in the fourth house is something that we oftentimes find within the charts of people whose families traveled a lot when they were growing up. And I don't mean travel in the sense of going to Disney World, I mean travel in the sense of relocation. So this is something that we oftentimes find within the charts of people whose families relocated quite a lot when they were growing up. It's something that we find within the charts of military kids who either had one or both parents working in the military, and therefore they were always in a state of movement, and they never really had the greatest sense of stability within their home life. And this is also something that we find within the charts of people who come from a family of divorce, or a family that is otherwise chaotic in such a way, whereas it causes the home life not to be as stable as we need it to be. And as a result of coming from a family life like that, we oftentimes find ourselves replicating those same patterns of instability within our larger adulthood. Because when we have the fourth house afflicted, on the one hand, we would like to feel as if, oh, that happened in my childhood, that's where it stayed. But more often than not, when the fourth house is afflicted, we find that that manifests within our larger life because that sets the foundation of how we approach life in general. And so, very often, Uranus conjunct the fourth house cusp isn't just the person who's coming from a family that was constantly in a state of movement, but as a result of that, when they grow into their adulthood, they find themselves constantly being in a state of movement, constantly being in a state of unrest, constantly not being able to really establish one particular network of people or friends within one particular place because there is such an urgency within themselves to move and to travel and to experience the world that they may not necessarily know how to create a very strong sense of rootedness and stability where they are. And so, one of the things that we would want to tell Al as well is a larger part of you already being a Mercury Uranus type is also you finding stability in terms of not only where you live and making sure that where you live is representing the stability that you desire, but also making sure that you allow yourself to stay in a place long enough to really appreciate that place and appreciate the people and appreciate the connections that you're forming and allow yourself to take root is essentially what we would like for Al to find the means of doing within this lifetime, because taking root is going to be one of the greatest ways in which he finds the stability to really fulfill his purpose and his destiny within this lifetime. When we're constantly in a state of flux and reflux, nothing really settles in a way that really gives us the ability to really find out what we're meant to do, or find out what we're meant to be, or find out where we're meant to be. And so we're desiring for Al, for him to find and cultivate a very real spirit of stability within his experience, regardless of what his childhood experience was like. And I reference the childhood experience because of the algol on the midheaven. When we have algol angular within a person's chart, and we know that the degree of algol is roughly 26 degrees Taurus, and we see 27 degrees Taurus culminating within his chart. When we have algol angular within our chart, it oftentimes is affecting the specific place where we find that fixed star on that angle. So when we have algol conjunct the ascendant, it's oftentimes directly impacting our physical body, and then our physical body becomes a source of strife or contention or sorrow or suffering within our lives. When we have algol conjunct our seventh house cusp, our descendant, then oftentimes our relationship story becomes a very harrowing place to exist. However, when we have algol on the midheaven, or when we have algol culminating within our charts, yes, it's impacting our career in general, but it's also impacting the other side of this axis, which is the fourth house cusp, which is having to do with our home life. So not only do we have Uranus conjunct the fourth house, which is speaking about instability within the early childhood life from one perspective, but we're also having the algol conjunct the midheaven, which is also speaking about this being a theme within his life in general, and that this idea of the stress or the strife or the contention or the sorrow or all of those things in relationship to the home life could be a very central part of how he's organized himself within this lifetime. And we don't want to organize ourselves around themes of stress and strife and suffering. But oftentimes, based on the lives that we find ourselves being thrusted into, that oftentimes becomes a foundational reality for a lot of us. He has his Mercury, ruler of the ascendant, at 28 degrees of Scorpio. Now, as you all know, within my philosophy of astrology, the final degree of a sign is going to represent a degree of crisis, 29 degrees. And I don't like to stretch rules to make them accommodate my own personal desires. So, fine, his Mercury isn't actually at 29 degrees, but it's pretty close. And so we could say that there is possibly this theme of crisis surrounding this particular area of life, which is the fourth house and the idea of family. And so everything within this chart continues to come back to the fourth house in a lot of ways as a very central theme and a very central area within his lifetime. And we're wanting for him to figure that part of things out. And even if he isn't able to figure it out with his actual family of birth, he can still figure that out in terms of the family that he creates. Because oftentimes, when we have a Uranus conjunct the fourth house story, there can be a sense that, hey, I may not necessarily be wanting to figure out how to fix my own family story narrative, but I am wanting to relive the pattern or recreate a pattern of what a family can be in terms of my intimate connections with people around me. And so, what we want for him to do is to, one, dig his heels into the ground, commit to staying in one place long enough for him to create the sort of community or for him to create the sort of family story that is necessary for him in order to really feel as if he is funding is the word I'm wanting to say, but finding a sense of stability within his immediate environment. But also, we want for him, once he has found that stability, we want for him to give himself a very specific sense of direction. Because the Mercury Uranus combination is one that can oftentimes cause us to feel as if we're waffling or to feel as if we don't really have the greatest sense of where we should be. And we're wanting to say to him that of all of the options and all of the possibilities and all of the things that you find exciting, you have to give yourself the ability to focus on one of those things, because focusing on one of those things will give you the ability to feel a genuine sense of accomplishment within your life. The Sun Neptune conjunction that he has is also a bit interesting, and it's also a little bit tricky, particularly from this perspective of Sun Neptune also being something that causes us to feel as if we don't necessarily have the greatest center of gravity within our lives. And Sun Neptune, particularly within the chart of a man, can oftentimes feel as if we are lost at sea, or it can feel as if there are so many possibilities or so many things going on within our lives that we can't really find a specific sense of direction or a specific sense of where we should go or how we should go there. So the Mercury Uranus and the Sun Neptune both are saying to us that, hey, it's time to settle. It's time to root your heels into the floor, and it's time to heal that part of your life that's always in a state of fluctuation. Because when you can heal that part of your life that's always in a state of fluctuation, it gives you a greater sense of your own self identity, but it also gives you a greater sense of knowing where you belong within this lifetime. And a big part of that healing process, once again, is having to do with the family story and how he is centralizing himself and healing that family narrative, particularly narratives surrounding the father. And I say the father because within this chart, we're seeing that he is having the sun as a universal significator of the father in the conjunction with Neptune. And very often for us, that can indicate that the male figure within our lives wasn't necessarily the best or the most supportive or the most reliable or the most dependable. And as a result of that, I find myself needing to cultivate my own sense of what it means to be a man within the world, because I didn't necessarily get the clearest idea of that, or I didn't necessarily get the best manifestation of that in terms of the paternal figure that did manifest for me for any number of reasons. Sun Neptune could be that my dad was unavailable because my dad was unwell. He was physically ill. He was physically sick. And as a result of that, I find myself having to navigate these themes of wellness and vitality and possibly also illness within my own life as a result of something that's coming to me from my father's line. And instead of inheriting this idea or this concept of my father, the benefic, or my father, the breadwinner, or my father, the really stable person, I've inherited this idea or this notion of being unwell, essentially, from the paternal lineage and from my father's side of the family. We also see that he has the sun in a pretty wide square to the Saturn, and that's also giving us this sense of the paternal figure not necessarily showing up in the most robust way, and also not necessarily showing up within the kindest or the most loving of ways as well. So these are things that we're wanting for him to heal within himself: his relationship to the masculine part of who he is, his relationship to the father as a particular impact or as a particular imprint within his life, but also his relationship to being grounded within the world in general, because all of these things are going to go a very far distance in terms of him being able to establish a sense of the identity or a sense of purpose that he's actually desiring at this time. So we really went in deep, particularly on the fourth house. And there's a lot of other things to say. And I didn't do my usual spiel in terms of looking at the aspects to the ascendant and all of those things. And surely there's a lot there. We have the Mars rising within the chart. We have the Jupiter rising. We have the Moon rising. So there's a lot to unpack from that perspective. But hopefully the content that we've provided Al with is something that he finds useful. So Al, I'm not sure if you can come back on, and there was a bit of an audio situation earlier. So if you say something, can you let me hear?
Yeah, how's this right now? Can you hear me?
This is very perfect. Okay,
I solved it. Good.
Awesome. So Al, can you give us like about 3 minutes of feedback of how this lands for you?
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's landed amazingly. I haven't really dived into the Mercury Uranus fourth house cusp conjunction much. I find myself focusing very proudly on my Mercury in Scorpio, for example. And you are talking to an astrologer, so thank you for bringing Uranus in there. And I find that it comes so easily, and I'm just and I sometimes I can't really answer where it's coming from or how it happened. Sometimes I say osmosis. Sometimes I say it just. I have a photographic. I often have a photographic memory for any studying that astrologically that I'm doing. I see it once, and I have it in my mind, to reproduce in a session, or just I can intuit it the right way, when having to reproduce it. Yeah, and I think a big piece. There's a couple pieces. Obviously, is the one about the stable home life and how that Mercury is right there, and the chaos of Uranus and Mercury being in Scorpio. And Scorpio, obviously, it's not peaceful. The constant transformation, etc., and the catharsis, and the metamorphosis, if you will, and other buzzwords, scorpionic buzzwords. And I have found myself really, really needing to ground, and it's been very, very hard. I mean, it's been very hard. And I often thought it was more of a Sagittarian nature to
Mm,
be moving, which is another mutable, of course. But I've enjoyed that part of me, a gypsy part of me. But really, finding this stability, and so that the gifts can emerge and they can emerge safely. The
mm,
Uranus Mercury gift, yeah, so I hear you 100% on all of this, and I don't know if I have a remedy just yet for it. I don't think that my external environment, my internal environment is really set up just yet. It's closer, but just yet to create said stability, create
mm,
that fourth house stability. So um, it's gonna be, if I look at the trajectory of my life for the next, let's say, 6 months to a year, it's gonna be slow and in pieces, where I may have, let's say, 6 months of some real stability, and then we'll see. I'll have to reemerge from that and see, what gets anchored, what comes from it, how it affects me positively. Um,
mhm,
and then so I'm moving to something else. Early, from a very early point in my astrological journey, as far as my own reading of my own natal, I have been acutely aware of Neptune conjunct Sun. And I wow, to bring it back to Saturn, even though it's a bit of a stretch, just to continue to bring it. My father, also a Pisces, I would say he's even he basically embodied the shadow components of Pisces, and for a man, also really not great. And so that Neptune on my son, I really always considered to be something that I had to continue to cultivate and strengthen my healthy son's ego. And so that's part and parcel with what you've said, and that I am doing.
mm,
And then also hopefully at the same time anchoring that healthy ego, and then of course getting the gifts of Neptune, the
mhm,
connections. There's a subtlety, there's a vulnerability, or there's a sensitivity, rather, was the word I'm looking for, that I can tap into when I have that strong healthy sun. And so I hear you just on that fourth house, the Cancerian piece, the external world of like I, like I would give the same advice. I'm not taking my own advice as we often do. Like, I would give the same advice, is to really research all the fourth house stuff, my ancestors, and where I come from, my grandparents, and all the pieces, just about like what my ancestry is.
mhm,
I
mhm,
think that would be a great way to strengthen and just heal some of whatever is nebulous. Back to Neptune,
mm,
nebulous, or on or unclear in me, within my energy system.
mhm,
So, and I guess finally, to tie a bow to this whole little share, strengthening the father that I didn't have in myself. My father was, pretty much exactly as you described, with Saturn and that Neptune conjunct Sun. And so I have been on the same quest to become the father that I didn't have, and also
mhm.
be very grateful for my own, and what he was able to provide me, and not. So
Awesome.
I think I've reiterated and said everything that could be said. So thank you. I pass.
Thank, thank you,
Yeah,
thank you, thank you so much, Al. So, Al, one question I have for you in terms of the
sure.
Uranus and the fourth house. So, was there a story of relocation or constant relocation in your life as a child?
No, can I tell you something? The relocation happened as soon as I was able to physically relocate myself. So the child, not so much in childhood. There was a few moves, but there's been a period of my life, and I've always attributed this to a very scorpionic experience, especially being in places where I was sharing resources, where I didn't really have anything, but it was a situation where I was literally sharing something, or there was some sort of exchange. So
Mhm.
I would say that I moved every year, at certain times in my life, every single year, moving.
Wow, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So and furthermore, just to wrap this up, the intensity and the plutonic nature of Scorpio, I would really love to heal and release some of that, because that up there's Scorpio again. It's
Mhm,
not Cancer. It's not smooth. It's not, or Taurus. Like,
mhm,
I would really like to not have these sometimes plutonic confrontations in the home world.
mhm.
So um, anyway, I hope that helps you. Just moving around a lot early on, when I became of age to do so for myself, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Al, and I really hope that this was beneficial for you.
Super beneficial. At some point, I'd like to hear about algol some more, but or maybe I don't actually.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. I'll do a video on it or something.
Great. Cool, Mychal. Thank you so much for your time. Take care.
You're so
Bye-bye.
welcome. You too. Have a good one. Bye-bye. All right. So thank you all so much for being in that with Al and I, and we're going to go on to the next person. So Joe, who do we have up next?
Yeah, so next up we have FG.
FG.
Yes, and the birth data is May 30th, 1969 at 7:54 a.m.
7:54 a.m. Yeah.
Yes, and it's in Rolla, so Rolla,
yeah.
in Missouri.
Okay, and okay, great, awesome. And event type?
A female.
Amazing, thank you.
Of course.
Okay, so I'm pulling up the chart on the screen, and so FG, you can unmute. Once again, we don't need for you to come on camera or anything, but you could unmute. And I mean, I can't even see what's happening because all I can see is the chart on the screen. But how are you?
I'm fine.
Awesome. Okay, so can you confirm that your ascendant is 8 degrees of Cancer?
It is, but I'm actually male.
Oh, okay, cool. Let me change this. Sorry about that. Let me change that to male. Edit chart. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, perfect. All right, and your audio is a little bit on the lower side. Is there any way for you to increase that a bit? Me can't go try say something.
Yes, can you hear me now? Louder?
I can hear you now, and I think I can hear you well enough to decipher what you're asking, but it is still pretty low. But you can go ahead, and we'll see.
Okay, so I just had a question about God. I've got a pretty significant one, I think. With Venus.
Okay. One second, FG, because I can't actually hear you at all. So let me I mean, I think you can either type directly to Joe, or if you're wearing a headset, can you just plug out the headset? Let's see if that works.
I also already have the question that he sent beforehand. If you want me to read it out again.
Okay, yeah, read the question, and then FG, I'll give a reading based on that question, and then if you could just figure out the audio thing so that when I'm done with the reading, you can hop on. That'll be great. Okay. Okay, Joe, go for it.
Right, awesome. So FG was asking, how would you deal with yods in a chart? And what advice would you give for me to deal with such a difficult yod in my chart?
Awesome. Okay, so this aspect, and so I say yud because I speak Hebrew, and the idea of the yod is based on the Hebrew letter yud, which is meant to represent the anyway. So how I would, I guess I'll say yod. So how I would deal with the yod configuration is I don't really focus a lot on aspect patterns per se. I believe in focusing on aspects, and I deconstruct aspects. So, for example, for the yud, I would consider it to be 2 quincunxes and a sextile. And within your chart, FG, we see that you have the quincunx between the Venus and the Moon. And you could even say that the Neptune is in there as well, even though the jury is out on how wide my quincunx orb is. Sometimes that changes. And you also have the quincunx between the Venus and the Pluto and the Jupiter down here. So this is the major configuration within this. I would separate it into two quincunxes and a sextile. And the reason for that is because I find that that is a more nuanced conversation to have, as opposed to looking at it as one quote unquote yard configuration specifically. And I'll say something about aspect patterns or these aspect configurations, like the yud or the kite or the mystic rectangle or the, all of these stuff. I'll say something about that, and then I'll speak about yours specifically. When we were practicing astrology in the 80s and the 90s, there was this drive towards trying to make it more easily understandable. And so we ended up doing a lot of things that flattened some of the intricacies that we find within the chart. One of those things is or has been this interpretation of chart based on the shape of the chart. So we know that we have the bucket and we have the splish splash and we have the fan and we have the, I don't even know what they're called, but we have that as a way of interpreting a chart because it's a broad brushstroke approach that doesn't actually allow us to have to deal with the planets or talk about the planets that are in the bucket or the splish splash. And the same thing is true about these larger aspect patterns like the yod or the mystic rectangle, because when we do that, the mystic rectangle itself has a meaning, but not actually a breakdown of the planets that constitute it. And similarly, what oftentimes happens when people use the yud within their practice is the yud itself as a configuration has a meaning and a mythology, when in fact it's the actual planets that are important. So within your chart, for example, you have Venus at 24 degrees of Aries, and we see the first quincunx between the Venus and the Moon at 24 degrees of Scorpio, 39 minutes. What I would say about this is I would think about which houses were Venus and the Moon ruling within your chart, because that would basically give us a context for how those two topics are operating together. So, for example, we have the Venus ruling your fifth house and we have the Moon ruling your first house. So this would say that there's a very big disconnect within your life within this lifetime between topics of the fifth house and topics of the first house. And one of the ways how that can manifest, particularly within the charts of women, when they have a quincunx between the rule of their first and the rule of their fifth, that can be one of the things that indicate issues within children or issues with childbirth or issues with having children in the first place in general. Within the charts of men, the fertility topic is something I'm still working through. And I think a big part of that is because the majority of my client population tends to be women. But in general, I would see this as being a potential rift or a potential gap between you and your children if you had children. And I would talk to you about ways of how to bridge that gap between the two of you, or ways of how to fix that, or ways of how to make sure that there's more harmony that exists within that relationship. Because this could be saying, one, that there are probably not children on the one hand, and two, if there are children, there could be a bit of a disconnect where it feels as if we're trying to mix ourselves like oil and water, but we don't actually have the greatest sense of connection. So that's one way with the Venus and the Moon. The other thing that I would say with the Venus and the Neptune, because we see that Neptune is relatively a part of this configuration as well, I would also talk about the love story in your life in general and how love is manifesting for you within your life in general, and particularly relationships with women. Actually, can you tell me, would your partners be male, female? Where would that be for you?
They would be female.
Female. Okay. So, with this, where was I going with this? With this, I was talking about the Venus in the quincunx with the Neptune, and Venus quincunx Neptune is oftentimes just as what's the word I'm looking for? It's oftentimes just as interesting or just as potentially challenging as Venus in a conjunction with Neptune, or Venus in a square with Neptune, or Venus in a an opposition with Neptune. The quincunx basically is operating the same. And sometimes when we have the Venus Neptune combination, the textbook definition of that is disappointment in love. And disappointment in love can manifest in a number of ways. It can manifest as us becoming deeply infatuated with someone. And as a result of that infatuation, we rush head first into that relationship, heart first into that relationship, only to find out later on that we're really not having the greatest amount of compatibility between ourselves and that person. Or it can be that we enter a relationship space and we find the same pattern repeating over and over again within our relationships or our intimate connections with women. And as a result of that, that can become a seed of disappointment that's manifesting within the life as well. You have the Venus and the Pluto combination within this configuration. And so you have the Venus quincunx, the Pluto. And usually I prefer to take a 1 degree orb for my quincunxes, but we could take this, we could take it, no problem. The Venus Pluto quincunx that you have here is also a bit of an issue from a romantic perspective, just because Venus and Pluto is oftentimes the same thing as Venus Neptune, but the Venus Pluto is moving into love from a more animalistic perspective, or from a more animalistic part of ourselves, which can oftentimes cause us to not think clearly when it comes to forming intimate relationships. And it can oftentimes cause us to get into relationships that are hot and heavy and very intense and very overwhelming. And before we know it, we find ourselves in the shape of something that doesn't actually feel as nurturing, or that doesn't actually feel as supportive as we would want for it to feel. So, in general, this topic of women within your life is going to be one of the larger topics that I would be mindful of in terms of deconstructing this yod configuration. And truthfully, I would even say that that's something that's even going back to your own relationship with your mother growing up. And the reason for that is because you have the Jupiter ruling the 10th house. And we know that in traditional astrology, the 10th house is the house of the mother. And we have that Jupiter in a conjunction with the South Node. And very often, when we have the planet that represents a person in a conjunction with the South Node, that can represent that that person was swallowed up. The my theory about the South Node is that the South Node is like a toilet bowl. And so to have the mother conjunct the South Node could be a sense that there was an inavailability or an unavailability with my mother in terms of my life, or that my mother represented a point of loss, or a point of not having, or a point of lack, or there was something within my maternal relationship that was a seed of either disappointment or fear or anxiety within your life in general. And as a result of that, this theme of that interaction with women could manifest later on in terms of the romantic sphere as well. So that would be how I would speak about this yod configuration for you. I'd say, hey, this is playing a major role within your life as far as romance is concerned, is playing a major role within your life as far as your relationship to women is concerned, and it's playing a major relationship, or it's playing a major role within your life in terms of how you navigate this topic of intimacy and love, and what it is to be loved, and what it is to be in love, and what it is to share that with a woman in general. And so that could be a major source of healing. And insofar as any quincunx can represent something that is a major area of healing within our lives, I would say for you that this is representing a major area within your life that you could focus on and spend more of your healing efforts addressing. Because once we address that issue, then so many of the other issues that we find manifesting in life as a result of it will also find their way, or they'll also clear up. Does this deconstruction of these planetary combinations make sense within the context of your life, FG?
Well, yes, absolutely. Um, everything. I have had
Okay,
to
so FG, 1 second. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what's happening, but there's do you have in a headset?
no.
Oh, okay. So you just, I guess, well, I just heard you say no very clearly. So probably if you come closer to your mic, that or lift your mic or something, that would be great. But go ahead.
I apologize about that. I'm on my phone, but I have had difficulties uh, with, and also my last two girlfriends passed away, so that's been tough. Also, um, right about my mother. My mother uh, has mental illness, so I grew up with that, and that's been probably a rough issue for me. And of course, my relationship with women. So yeah, you're pretty accurate.
Awesome,
Oh yeah.
awesome, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to try to repeat some of the things you said, just so for people who are listening in. But I think, and please forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that your last two girlfriends, they've passed away. Is that what you said?
Yes, correct.
O- Okay, and then you were saying that your mother, you lived with a mother who had mental illness.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, okay. Okay, so here we see, and so thank you so much for sharing that because I know that those are major topics in life. And but here we see that your chart is really showing that in a very, very strong way. And I mean, even the Jupiter and the node, the Jupiter conjunct the South node isn't necessarily a part of that yod configuration, but the Jupiter and the South node is really speaking about this central loss of the mother. And once again, I always tell people that traditionally speaking, the 10th house is the house of the mother and the fourth house is the house of the father. And I think that this is another testimony to that, to support that. Because if the 10th house were truly the house of the father, then this Jupiter node connection would be more indicative of your relationship to your dad. But it's actually indicative of your relationship with your mom and the instability that that growing up with a mother who was unwell played within your life. And like you said, and like I said earlier in the reading, this pattern of having that instability within the maternal space, it can it can spread out into how we interact with women in general. And then life begins to magnify situations to us that are also in conformity with this idea of loss of women. And sometimes that can just manifest as relationships with women that are constantly stressful and that don't work out. Or in your case, it's manifested in a more visceral way and in a more literal way in terms of the passing of two women who you had a relationship with. But I think the major story within all of this is that if we can focus more of our efforts on healing that specifically within your lifetime, and it really goes back to healing the impact of the role that your mother played within your life. Is your mother still with us?
Yes. Still alive.
Okay. So I think I think sometimes it can be difficult when we're adults to bring stuff up with our parents and say, hey, I feel like you didn't do this for me when I was a kid. But sometimes we are needing that level of catharsis and that level of release. And sometimes we're needing that level of reprieve because it allows us to unlock a greater process of healing within ourselves. And when you begin that momentum of that healing process of having a conversation with her, if that is possible, or doing some healing work either in relation to your mother or with your mother, it creates a momentum within the universe that naturally unlocks and that naturally brings a greater sense of lightness and ease to all of your intimate relationships with women in general. But it starts home and it starts in terms of healing and fixing or bringing some level of repair to the maternal side of things. Okay?
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome, FG. Thank you so much for showing up today. All right, Joe.
Hello.
Hey, how are we doing?
We're doing good. Are we doing another chart?
You tell me. I mean, we could
Okay.
also do a Q&A if there isn't. Are there cues that need to be aid or no?
There is one question that needs to be aired, and we also have two other charts. We'll have three other charts on queue. So do you want to do the question and then go one more chart?
Give me the question, then let's go one more chart.
Okay, awesome. So the question is from Simone Lafreniere. I hope I'm saying that right. And the question is, can synastry readings be used not related to lovers, but to reflect about how might one go about improving relationships with other people, or is it only about romantic relationships?
This is a great question, Joe. And this is a great question, Simon. And truthfully, when it comes to synastry, synastry is just the astrology of compatibility in general. It doesn't really matter whether that is you and your lover, or whether that's you and your mother, or whether that's you and your boss. Synastry is simply the astrology of compatibility. And so there's that. There's that. You could use synastry as a means of assessing your relationships to your parents, to your siblings, to anybody within your life with whom you have a relationship. Sometimes people even do synastry between themselves and their spiritual teachers. So for example, I study Iyengar yoga, so maybe I would do a synastry between my chart and BKS Iyengar's chart to see what about him attracts me to wanting to study with him. So there are all of these applications of synastry. What I think is a missing piece of synastry today is people knowing how to read charts well independently, people knowing how to read a chart in the first place. And in the place of knowing how to read a chart well specifically, and knowing how to compare two charts next to each other, we now find people relying overly heavily on the composite chart, or on the Davidson chart, or on these charts that aren't even really real in the first place as their primary means of conducting synastry. However, traditionally speaking, when it came to assessing compatibility between two people, we had those two people's charts side by side. And based on that, we were able to tell, okay, this is how this person is in life in general. And as a result of that, this is how this type of person is going to interact with this other type of person. So that's the type of synastry that I highly encourage. That's the type of synastry that I more so enjoy, as opposed to creating a make-believe chart like the composite chart or the Davidson chart. And sure, those additional charts can be useful, but there's never going to be any version of synastry that is more profoundly on point regarding your relationship to anybody else in your life, other than comparing your chart with the chart of that person side by side. Okay. How was that, Joe?
Awesome. All right. So next chart is Randi, and the birth data is March 15th of 1977. Okay.
Let me get that there. Randi, March 15th of 1977. Great time.
It's at 9:39 a.m.
9:39 a.m. Place?
Oxnard, California.
OX?
OXNARD.
California. Great. Male, female?
Female.
Great. Amazing.
Do you also want me to read the question beforehand, or do you want me to bring them up first?
I think that reading the question has been useful. So you could read the question, and then we'll bring Randi on, and we'll go from there.
Okay, perfect. So Randy's question is, I have a question regarding my chart ruler and the fact that it is combust, debilitated, and in its fall. I wonder how many issues this is causing and if it's affecting my career. And I'll bring Randi here.
Awesome. Okay, Randi, how are you?
Hi, good.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to talk about, so specifically you want to know about the Mercury, and you also want to know about career, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfection. So first of all, you have your Mercury. So for those of you listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Randi's Mercury, or rather Randi's chart is March 15th, 1977 at 9:39 a.m. in Oxnard, OXNARD, California. And so, Randy, the first thing that we do see is that everything you said about this Mercury is correct. And when it comes to natal astrology, the idea of combustion isn't necessarily something that is really overwhelmingly significant. And the reason for that is because, why is the reason? The reason for that is because combustion just seems to be a lot more active and a lot more significant from a horary perspective or even from an electional astrology perspective, because those versions of astrology are more time sensitive. They're, people usually ask horary questions for things that are pressing within their lives right now. People usually cast elections for something that they're going to do in the not too distant future. And so there's a more pressing nature to those systems of astrology, whereas within natal astrology, you have your entire life to figure out everything that's going on within your chart. And therefore, within the context of a lifetime, we don't really notice the effects of the combustion as a thing that happens within a chart. There are other things that could be problematic, but not necessarily the combustion. Now, within your chart, your Mercury is ruling your first house and your fifth house. So if I were to speak about it, I would speak about it specifically in terms of your children and potentially your relationship to them, because I see some things going on in the fifth house that would be significant for me to talk about if we were going to have that conversation. For example, you have Pluto. You have Pluto present within the fifth house. And sometimes, I think I said this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, sometimes that's something that we find within the charts of women who make a specific decision that they don't want to have kids. That's one of the ways how Pluto in the fifth can manifest. And another thing here, just talking about the Mercury representing your kids, at 24 degrees of Pisces, that could also once again make the issue of children and child rearing be a potentially big ticket item within your life. Once again, from the perspective of your own health and your own ability to conceive, because the Mercury, as you know, isn't really doing that well. And then the next thing that we see within your chart, there's a lot of stuff going on in your chart from the perspective of from the perspective of reproduction. The next thing that we see within your chart is that you have your moon is in a square relationship with Uranus. And moon Uranus is something that we oftentimes see within the charts of women who don't necessarily want to manifest womanhood in a stereotypical way. So they don't want to be your mom, and they don't want to be your sister, and they don't want to be your wife, and they don't want to be your anything, because there's this sense of moon Uranus of the woman that wants to be free, and of the woman who doesn't necessarily want for her freedom to be saturated with the responsibilities of having to breastfeed or the responsibilities of having to cook somebody a dinner or any of that stuff. And so sometimes when we have moon Uranus, what we see from a medical astrology perspective is this can sometimes represent women who are delaying the process of becoming mothers until a time within their lives when they feel ready. Sometimes they don't feel ready until they're 60 years old, at which point, from a biological perspective, it can be a little bit late for that to happen. And so the moon Uranus will then, therefore, signify, what would it then signify? Then the moon Uranus would then, therefore, signify medical intervention as a means of conceiving. So that could be IVF or some other form of fertility treatment. But there's a scientific intervention that allows the conception to be possible as a result of the woman possibly waiting to conceive. So these are some of the ways how we see these patterns playing out. You have the moon Saturn combination within your chart as well. I'm going around the chart because that gives me a sense of what's going on for you in general. And it also gives me a sense of what I perceive might be a background story for you. I could also be completely wrong, but from an astrological perspective, it's kind of doing things to my mind that needs to be done. You also have the moon Saturn opposition. And the moon Saturn opposition is something that we oftentimes find within the charts of women who are what? It's something that we oftentimes find within the charts of women who are feeling as if the story of the mother, or the story of being mothered in general, is something that was a very difficult one in life. And it's interesting because I feel like all day, I feel like we've been talking about this maternal theme. Well, the first reading was about the father theme, and then the second reading was about the mother. And then in your chart, we're having this big motherhood theme show up. Not only your relationship to possibly being a mother, but also your relationship to possibly being mothered. And so the moon Saturn is manifesting and saying, hey, this topic of motherhood has been a challenge within your life in general, particularly in terms of your relationship to possibly your own mother. And as a result of that, the blowback from that could be that it possibly makes you wonder if you could stand within the role of motherhood in a way that actually will be different from the way in which you've been mothered, because there's this sense of having a cold, dry, distant mother when we have the moon opposite Saturn. And it makes us wonder whether or not we have enough maternal training from our own childhood experiences to step into motherhood in a way that would actually be good for anyone. So that's another piece that we're seeing with the moon Saturn. Now, speaking about the topic of your career life specifically, and there's also, before I go to your career life, let's just talk about this Jupiter in the 12th house, because you have Jupiter conjunct Algol, and I think, who was it earlier who wanted, I think it was Al who wanted me to talk about Algol. And so might as well we have the Algol conversation, because it's a big factor within your life. It may not necessarily be a big factor for your career. It is a big factor for your career as well. What am I saying? You have Jupiter ruling the 7th house of romantic relationships, which we'll talk about that. But you also have Jupiter ruling the 11th house, which represents the money that you make from your career. And it's conjunct Algol. Algol is the demon star. Algol is Medusa. Algol is the Gorgon's head. And if we know the story of Medusa, she got her head chopped off. So very often when we have something within our charts conjunct Algol, it's representing a part of our lives that we're losing our head over. And so having my partner in my 12th house, having your partner in your 12th house in a conjunction with Algol, is saying that this topic of being partnered to people in general is probably feeling like a no-go within this lifetime. It's saying that this topic of being in a relationship in general is probably feeling like an area of extraordinary stress, of extraordinary strife, and it's feeling like something that you're losing your head over more often than not, which could be stressful. Now, we know that the 12th house of our chart is the 6th house of our partner. Therefore, this could indicate that your partner is physically unwell, i.e., you're having a partner who is sick within this lifetime. This is further corroborated by the fact that you have Neptune in your 7th house, which is also saying the partner is unwell, the partner is sick. Oftentimes, Neptune in the 7th house is going to be similar to us having a Venus-Neptune conjunction, which, as you heard me speak earlier to FG, Venus-Neptune, was it FG? It was somebody who had the Venus-Neptune. The point is, the Venus-Neptune is a combination of disappointment in love. And so any planet that we have within our 7th house is going to be, there's a siren going past. I wonder if you could hear it. All right, that's one siren. I think that's it. Anyway, the point is that any planet that is in our 7th house is going to be similar to that planet being conjunct our Venus, from the perspective of the 7th house having to do with love and Venus having to do with love. So Neptune in the 7th oftentimes feels like Venus Neptune. This love was too good to be true, and now it has turned into ashes in my mouth, which is my favorite line from Game of Thrones, but it is actually the truth. When we have the Venus-Neptune combination, it oftentimes ends up feeling as if love is a point of major disappointment within our lives in general. And it's not necessarily the nicest feeling thing in the world, because it feels as if we're constantly let down in that particular area of our lives. If we were to try to raise our vibration and spin this in a different way, we could say that you might be attracted to spiritual people because Neptune is representing spirituality. It could say that you're attracted to people who are working in the film industry because Neptune has to do with film. It could say that you're attracted to artists because there's that factor within this as well. And actually, you do have the Venus conjunct the South Node, which is an issue for a traditional perspective of astrology, but from a Uranian perspective of astrology, Venus node has to do with you forming intimate relationships with artists or you having intimate connections with artists. This is something that we oftentimes find within the charts of people who themselves are artists. So you yourself might be an artist, or you might be connected with people who are creative, or you might be forming intimate relationships with people who are artistic in general. So that's nice. We like the Venus node from that perspective. We also like the Neptune in the seventh from the perspective of forming a relationship with an artist. However, Neptune in the seventh doesn't really discriminate what type of art it's doing. And you might end up with a visual artist or you might end up with a con artist because both of those things exist on the spectrum of art in general as far as Neptune is concerned. So the Neptune in the seventh piece can be a feeling of a disappointment in love. It can be a feeling of there's something deceptive about my love relationship, that my partner isn't really being forthcoming and my partner isn't really being as honest as I would like for my partner to be. Those things could be a possibility. But within your particular chart, because of you having your partner conjunct Algol in the 12th house, that could equally end up manifesting as my partner is unwell. And it's something that I'm losing my head over. It's something that my partner is losing their head over as well. And we have the partner having an exact square from Mars, which is the ruler of the partner's sixth house of sickness, which is another indication that probably this could indicate that your partner is physically unwell within this lifetime, and it could be of a chronic nature because this is a fixed square between planets in fixed signs. So it indicates that whatever the difficulty is that's manifesting within your partner's life and causing your partner to manifest as a quote unquote enemy of your happiness or an enemy of your joy could very well be a fixture within your relationship that will not easily be changed, if it could even be changed at all. So that's the backdrop of some of these larger topics that, or some of these larger patterns that you have within your life. Now, the Jupiter is ruling the 11th house of the money that you make from your career. And it's in the 12th house, which is already saying to us that it might feel as if the money that you're making from your career is a hidden enemy of your happiness. That's one thing. The second thing, and what does that mean in the real world? It could mean that you feel as if you're not making enough money from your career, or you feel as if from a financial perspective, your financial life is not as great as it could be because your career doesn't have the ability to pay you as great as it should be paying you. So Jupiter ruling your 11th house conjunct Algol is saying that you might be losing your head over your financial lack of prospects within the specific line of work that you're doing. So that's the Jupiter in the 12th house. Now, the other piece here that we have as far as your career is concerned is your career is signified by Saturn at 10 degrees of Leo, 34 minutes retrograde in your third house, which isn't very, very nice. And the reason for that is because that is the sign of Saturn's detriment. And Saturn is also retrograde. We don't like Saturn in any of the signs of his detriment, but we also don't like Saturn retrograde. So it's a bit of a double whammy, saying to us that the topic of your career life is going to be one of the larger topics that you will have to struggle with within this lifetime. And I don't say that lightly because ultimately we all have to struggle somewhere. And for all of us, we all have our sufferings, which is something that somebody said to me in Vancouver once because I told her that I was addicted to cheese. And she said, "It's okay, Mychal, we all have our sufferings." So we all have our sufferings. And the career topic for you within this lifetime is showing up as one of the larger areas of sufferation within your life, within this lifetime. And we'll talk about it. You have the Saturn in a square relationship with the Uranus. And that could be signifying that there's a fundamental seed of instability within the topic of your job life, and that there's a fundamental seed of instability in terms of what you're doing from a career perspective. These are things that at this point within your life, we would feel as if you've had enough of that experience already to not necessarily replicate that experience within your future. However, life being what it is, we oftentimes get stuck in a rut of repetitive action. So even though we know that the career instability side of things is a problem in general, where's my brain? Even though we know that the career instability side of things is a problem in general, you might still find yourself repeating that pattern of career instability, even if it's uncomfortable. Because the reality of life is that our lives on this planet is are meant to be lived within a petri dish of stability. And sometimes when we get ourselves accustomed to instability, that becomes our new norm. That becomes our new petri dish of stability. And so here, there's this accommodation of instability surrounding your career within your life in general. And we would like for that to be something that you can turn the hands on, or that you could change the momentum surrounding. Now, we have the Saturn separating from the Uranus, which should technically say to us that this is something that is in your earlier life, but it's not something that's going to plague you later on within your life. However, the Saturn is retrograde separating from the Uranus, but the Uranus is also retrograde applying to the Saturn. And once again, this is happening from fixed signs. And so once again, there's this sense of there's a fixed seed of instability that consistently manifests within my career life. And I don't know how to I don't know how to change it. I don't know how to shake it. I don't know how to make it budge. Because when I think about career, I think about an area of my life where there is this seed of constant fluctuation in ways that don't actually allow me to feel grounded in terms of what I'm doing in the world in general. And for some people, that can be exciting. However, that will be exciting for people who are naturally geared to that level of excitement in general. You have the ruler of your chart at 24 degrees Pisces, and it's Mercury. You don't need that level of excitement because your chart isn't necessarily built in such a way that allows you to be able to handle that level of excitement in a way that actually feels stimulating. Some people, their charts are built for chaos. Other people, their charts have an inbuilt chaos, but they don't really necessarily know how to navigate that in the best of ways because constitutionally they aren't chaotic people. And this is something that we're seeing within you. We're finding that your life has been such that it has thrusted you into these experiences of chaos and instability, but that isn't necessarily who you are. And as a result of that not necessarily being who you are, the chaos and the instability of your life, it feels as if it's just happening to you and as if you don't necessarily have an actual active role in terms of navigating it or in terms of changing it, because it seems as if that is the world that you've been thrusted into. And so none of this has to do with your Mercury at all, actually. It has to do with a lot of other factors that we see within your chart that aren't the Mercury. You also have the Mars in the 10th house, and the Mars is ruling your 12th house. Wherever we find the ruler of our 12th house within our chart is going to be a place within our lives where we manifest a very real sense of silent suffering. And I say silent suffering because that's one of the things that the 12th house signifies. It signifies a sense of silent suffering. The things that we cry about in the dark that we don't feel as if we could share with anybody because there's nobody who is really going to understand the things that we're suffering over. And we find this manifesting in your 10th house of career, which can say that not only might the workplace be a very contentious place within your life in general, but it's also saying that the work environment is probably going to be a place where it feels as if you constantly are falling flat on your face. And the reason why I say constantly falling flat on your face is because the 12th house is the place where we go to fall flat on our face. And so therefore, having the rule of the 12th house and the 10th house is saying that my career life is feeling like something that I just am not really able to figure out in the best of ways. Now, if we were to step back from this, from the specific traditional trajectory that we're taking, and look at this from more of a planet to planet based perspective, Mars and Jupiter in combination is a lovely combination, because Mars and Jupiter in combination is the combination of success in work. We love that for you. And at the same time, well, not and nothing. What this is saying is that you have the seed of being successful at the work that you do within your chart for sure. That is something that is manifesting in your life. It's something that is present within your life. It's something that's built into your chart from a universal perspective. However, from a more specific perspective, where noticing some of the things that you have to navigate and some of the hoops that you have to jump through in order to actually find the level of career stability that you want to find. Now, ultimately, the reality of all of this is that if I had to help you navigate this or figure out what to do about this, I would say that first of all, you need to have better conversations in your career life as far as the compensation is concerned, because the Jupiter conjunct Algol in the 12th house isn't really able to feed anybody, and it really isn't able to support or sustain a lifestyle anywhere. So we would want for you to have better conversations about money in general, what you're doing with money, what your bosses are doing as far as money is concerned in your life. And we want to make sure that you're making sure that you're being paid in a way that actually allows you to support the quality of life that you want to have. Because it doesn't make sense connecting yourself into a job that doesn't have the ability to support you financially. So that's the Jupiter piece. And that's a conversation that you should have within your workplace regardless. Now, the next thing is that you're having the ruler of your second house as the moon in an opposition with Saturn, which is saying once again that your career, which is represented by the Saturn, is in direct conflict with your money, which is represented by your moon. So once again, this is saying that you're oftentimes feeling as if your career is leaving you out in the cold from a financial perspective, and as if it's not able to take care of you financially in the ways that you want. So once again, this is demanding for you to have very specific financial conversations from the very get-go, because those conversations are largely going to clarify for you, even before starting that job, that that job is going to be good for you or not. Now, finally, the last thing that we see is the Saturn in the square relationship with Uranus, which, like I said, this could be manifesting as a chronic problem within your life. In the same way as right now, I feel like I have a chronic problem in my throat. Give me 1 second. So this could be manifesting as a very chronic issue within your life, this instability that seems to always be chasing your career, because that's what's happening. The Uranus is retrograde applying to the Saturn, so there's a sense of instability chasing my career. That has to be something that you determine within yourself, not to rehash within your life. That has to be something that you determine within yourself, not to recreate within your life. And you know whatever the patterns are surrounding your career previously that have led to an unstable career environment. And so if you genuinely want to manifest stability within your career life, then you genuinely have to put yourself in an environment that naturally facilitates more stability within your vocation. Your chart has many factors that point towards art. Once again, I spoke about the Venus node combination being something that we see within the charts of artists. You also have Venus in a contraparallel relationship with your midheaven, which is also something that we see within the charts of artists. And these are all wonderful things, especially if you wanted to pursue art as a profession. And at the same time, you have to make that profession make sense. You have to make your artistic aspirations make sense on paper and financially, because there's one thing to follow our heart and it's another thing to feed ourselves. And we would like to feel as if in the process of you fulfilling whatever your own creative passions and pursuits are in life, you make sure that you're able to feed yourself from doing those things. So These are the things that we need to focus on within this lifetime from a career perspective. We need to focus on speaking about the money upfront. We need to focus on noticing the pattern of instability in our previous careers and notice how instability has seemed to chase us within our previous careers. And then, based on those past experiences, you need to figure out how to centralize your efforts so that you create a greater sense of structure within your life as far as your career is concerned. And finally, if it is something artistic that you find yourself doing within this lifetime, you also have to pay your bills. And you also have to make sure that that art or that creative endeavor is something that actually has the ability to feed you and sustain you and support you. And if you can't do that by yourself, then the recourse would be to find yourself plugging in to a stable organization that has the ability to pay you what you're worth, but that also has the ability to be a more stable, harmonious place for you to be in from a career perspective, because we note that that may not have been your story as far as your career life has been concerned up until this point. So those would be the things that I would suggest for you to do as far as your career is concerned. And I hope that this is something that you find helpful. So you could come back on, you could unmute Randy and let me know how this landed for you.
Yeah. As far as the instability, and I feel like it just is happening to me. Definitely is true. My sister is an artist, and I want to be her agent because I like talking to people and selling her. But I also like being creative too. So I do I do like Facebook posting. So I like make, whatever, just for one place right now. I started doing that about a year ago. And no, I'm not being compensated very well, but I know her and she's kind of like, giving me the opportunity. As far as like the mothering stuff that you brought up, I did not want that, but I do now, and I have two, and I just love them. I'm so happy.
Okay, so you were saying that initially you didn't want kids.
Yeah. But
okay.
I would have more. I would have more now, but I'm 47, so.
And did you have them later on in life?
No, the first one I had when I was 22, and he is autistic, and he still lives with me. And the second one, I did have an emergency C-section with. I'm sorry, but he's so wonderful. Yeah, I love my kids.
Awesome.
Sorry.
No.
I get emotional when I talk about my kids.
It's completely fine.
Yeah, you were pretty dead on.
Awesome. Well, I hope that this is helpful, and I hope that you can apply some of these things. The last thing I wanted to ask you, Randy, was I brought up the relationship side of things, and just the intimate relationship and potentially marriage. How did that land for you?
I was married. I ended up leaving him. He just wasn't doing anything, and I was going to school and I was working, and I had my son, and he just wasn't participating in anything. I mean, he was when we first got married, but he chopped off 2 of his fingers. And somehow that just put him into a place where he just could not recover at all, like of depression, which was frustrating to me because, I'm doing everything and you're sitting on the couch and you have another hand and the other one still doesn't work. And then, I don't generally pick men that are very good to me. So I took about 5 years off. And that was fine. I loved it. I didn't even care. Yeah.
Well, Well, I think it's interesting that you said that he, chopped off two of his fingers. And because, like I said earlier, we do have the partner in the 12th house, which is the house of sickness or the house of his own sickness. And we have him in a square relationship with the ruler of that house of sickness, which is Mars. And so what I was saying was it could be a chronic issue that he has. And there's nothing more chronic than chopping off two of your fingers because they don't tend to grow back.
No,
So so there we see
just the tip.
that just the tip. So there we see that manifesting within his life, and I think it's interesting that the partner is being it's being your partner is conjunct Algol, and Algol has to do with chopping off one's head. But I think it's interesting that there is this chopping. It wasn't a head, but it was something else. And then finally, we do have the Mars squaring him, and Mars has to do with violence and bloodshed and knives and all of that stuff. So it's just interesting how the astrology is so literal within the context of your chart.
Yeah, no kidding. But both
And
my
and
kids
was
did
there
change my life.
mhm. Was there a topic in him having that experience? Was there a topic, or was there a point at which he became alcoholic, or there was also an alcoholism piece to your romantic to your romantic past?
No, I do think that he was using something. Um, I mean, I have my suspicions. I don't know now because he passed away. He after we got divorced by like 7 years, but so I never really got to ask him, and I don't know if he would have told me anyways. But I do think that he was using something.
Okay, so that's the Neptune and the seventh.
Hmm.
Okay. Listen, Randy, thank you so much for sharing with us today. And I've truly learned from being in this with you, and I really hope that this was beneficial for you.
Yes, I thank you very much.
Awesome. You're very, very welcome. All right. Teamwork makes the dream work. Thank you all so much for showing up today. I'm really, really so happy to be able to do this all over again. Mychal, fix my stars. You know, I think that there was a point in time where I thought that that name was pretty presumptuous and whatever. But I got it. My sister's middle name is Ianla, from Ianla Van Zandt, and there was this show that used to come on called Ianla Fix My Life. And so this is kind of my spin-off of Miss Cleo and Ianla Fix My Life. And it's something that I'm genuinely, genuinely passionate about, because I think that as astrologers, we shouldn't just be describers of what occurs within people's lives, but our ability to accurately describe what occurs within people's lives should also give us the ability to help those people navigate those things, particularly if those things that we've described are challenging. So I love doing this work. I love sharing this work with you. If this is something that you want to be a part of, please make sure to sign up for our newsletter. Our newsletter way to find out about what we're doing here at the Oraculos School of Astrology. And you can sign up for that by visiting oraculosastrology.com/newsletter. Also, if you want to practice astrology in this way, then please do join us for our upcoming Professional Astrologers Diploma Program, which begins this September 2024. The exact type of astrology that I demonstrate on a weekly basis here, here on the Oraculos Podcast is the exact astrology I teach, and is the exact astrology that my students are able to replicate. Because I believe that if we are good at something, we should be able to transfer that or translate that to other people, and those other people should be able to replicate that as well. So if you have been impressed, or if you have just enjoyed the quality of the astrology that you've seen me demonstrate here on the Oraculos Podcast, then by all means, join us this coming September in our Professional Astrologers Diploma Program. I can guarantee you that it will be extraordinarily well worth your time. And what else do I have to say? There's so much going on. Also, once again, if you haven't already subscribed to the Oraculos Podcast, please do so. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Spotify, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, the more and more we have more people subscribing to the podcast, the more the algorithm shares the podcast with more people. So please do make sure to go and do that. And if you've loved this episode and if you love the work that we do in general, please give us a thumbs up on this video and on our video content. Once again, just because it goes a long way in supporting us, and it also allows me to keep this work free of charge. Master Astrologer Judith Hill is going to be here at the Oraculos School of Astrology on the 6th of July, and she's going to be teaching us all about remediating the transits of Uranus. So if you find yourself as a person navigating an upcoming Uranus transit, or if you just want more information in general to share with your own clients about how to remediate these very electrifying and very destabilizing transits, then please do sign up for our upcoming workshop with Judith. We're running an early bird special. It's $70 as the early bird special. You do not want to miss this workshop. This is one of the first workshops I think that Judith has done outside of her own astrology school, where she's teaching and lecturing in this way. And this is going to be one of a series of workshops that I host for Judith. So by all means, please join us for the very first one, which is her remediating Uranus talk. And finally, what is the final thing? Well, there's two finallys. Finally, we have our upcoming Horary Astrology Intensive that's going to be coming up on August 11th. If you want to dive into a world of concrete astrology with me, then that's the place to do it. I sincerely look forward to you being there. And we're going to be diving into the content in this book, Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise. There's so much in here that I want to unpack with you, and the Horary Intensive is where that's going to happen. I look forward to seeing you all here again. You can join us here in this virtual capacity. You can join us for any of our webinars. Please check out our website to find out when those are going to be. And if you want to get your chart read here on Mychal Fix My Stars, then please make sure to sign up for our newsletter so that you can know when we're sending out submissions for you to get your chart read, so that you can be next on the show. I look forward to seeing you very soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.